Rancher lived alone for years, until Bigfoot finally spoke about humans. He lived alone for years until the forest spoke back. It began with footprints, then gifts, apples traded for stones. And one night from the fog, a voice said 3 words: food, safe, friend. It wasn't just sound, it was meaning. Then it spoke again of men, destroyers, protectors. The creature knew us better than we knew ourselves. It warned him, more come, danger. But before it vanished into the cedars, it said one last thing: James, friend, forest safe, trust. And from that night on, every autumn before the frost, James left a light on his porch for the forest that once spoke back. Before we begin, take a moment to comment the name of your city. Where are you watching from tonight? And when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. British Columbia, 1994. The sun was sinking behind the dark ridge, painting the sky in bruised shades of violet and gold. The forest had gone still, eerily still. No birds, no crickets, just the soft breath of wind slipping through the cedar pines, whispering against the cabin walls. James Paul, 58, stood alone at the edge of his yard. His face was carved by years of cold wind and solitude. He lived where the road ended, where silence was the only neighbor left. His old dog Rex paced by the porch tail, low, uneasy. That evening, James noticed something unusual in the mud near the woodpile prints. Deep, wide, and too long to belong to any man. The soil had sunk under something heavy. The air thickened. Then it came 3 slow knocks from deep within the trees. Thump, thump, thump. Rex growled low. The lantern in James's hand trembled. He turned toward the forest. There, half hidden in the mist, stood a figure. Massive, upright, shoulders broad as a doorway, its breath visible in the dying light. It did not move. It did not run. For a long moment, neither did he. Then, with a voice barely louder than the wind, James said, "I'm not here to hurt you." The creature blinked once, slow, deliberate, and the night fell utterly silent again. In that breathless quiet, the forest seemed to listen back. Part 1. The Man Who Stopped Talking. The morning came gray and thin, dragging light through the mist that clung to the valley floor. The storm had passed, but the forest still breathed the weight of silence. Inside the small cabin, smoke curled lazily from the stovepipe, carrying the faint smell of coffee and old wood. James Paul sat at the table, his back slightly bent, his rough hands wrapped around a tin cup. The cabin was more memory than home now, its walls lined with the ghosts of years gone by. Above the hearth, a single photograph hung crookedly in a wooden frame. A woman, smiling faintly, hair tied with a red ribbon. Anna, his wife. Gone 10 years now, lost to a blizzard that had swallowed half the valley one bitter winter night. He had built this cabin with her board-by-board laughter echoing between the hammer strikes. Now it creaked under the burden of loneliness. Rex, the old shepherd dog, lay by the stove, eyes half closed, one ear flicking at the faintest sound. Every few minutes the dog would glance toward James as if to remind him he wasn't completely alone. James stared at the photograph. He didn't talk much anymore. Not to people, not even to himself. When Anna died, words had lost their use. Silence had taken their place, familiar, heavy, but somehow safer. He stood, joints stiff, and moved to the window. The forest beyond was still. Dew glittered on the grass like shards of glass. Somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker hammered once, twice, then stopped. Even nature seemed hesitant to break the quiet. He poured the rest of his coffee into the sink and muttered, half to Rex, half to the wind. Same day, same damn thing. The dog lifted its headtail, tapping weakly against the floorboards. Breakfast was simple. Eggs. Bread silence. He chewed slowly, the sound of his fork against the tin plate echoing in the empty room. Outside, smoke rose from the chimney like a pale thread reaching for the sky. After breakfast, James stepped outside. The air was cold enough to sting. His boots sank into the wet ground as he checked the fence line, habit guiding his movements more than thought. The same trail he'd walked every morning for years. The same creaking gate. The same hollow wind whispering through the cedars. He had learned to live small, repair feed, survive. but not to feel. Feelings had teeth, and he'd already been bitten too many times. Still, some mornings when the light caught just right, when the forest shimmered with frost and the smell of pine hung heavy, he almost felt her there again, standing by the porch, hair loose, laughing softly at the cold. He would stop then, hand frozen midair, and whisper her name like a prayer that never reached the sky. Anna. The word felt too big for the space it occupied. It filled the air, then dissolved into nothing. Inside, he sat by the fire, feeding it small pieces of wood. Flames flickered and danced across his face, lighting the deep lines carved by years of weather and grief. He spoke softly, eyes never leaving the fire. I couldn't save you. Rex stirred, ears twitching at the sound of his voice. It wasn't often the cabin heard him speak. James leaned back, sighing. Not again, he whispered two words that clung to the room like smoke. Outside, the forest stretched endless and ancient, indifferent to the ache of one man's regret. But in that indifference there was a strange kind of comfort. The trees didn't judge. The wind didn't remind him of what he'd lost. They just were. He spent the afternoon stacking wood, fixing a hinge, moving through the motions of survival. When the sun dipped behind the ridge, he lit the lantern and took his seat by the window, the same one he had chosen every night for years. From there, he could see the tree line, a wall of darkness at the edge of his world. He watched it the way some men watched the sea, with respect, with fear, and with longing. That was when he noticed something, a faint movement in the distance, just a shadow shifting among the trees, gone as quickly as it came. He leaned forward, squinting. Nothing now, just the slow sway of branches in the wind. Rex lifted his head and let out a low growl deep in his chest. James felt it too, the change in the air, the quiet turning heavier, like the forest was holding its breath. He set his cup down, eyes never leaving the trees. The lantern light caught the edge of his weathered face, and for the first time in years there was something there beyond exhaustion. A spark, a question, maybe even a kind of hope. The last words he spoke that night were barely audible, more exhale than sound. Not again. He didn't know what he meant by it exactly. Maybe it was about loss. Maybe it was about the silence. Or maybe deep down it was a promise that if another life, any life, crossed his path in need, he wouldn't turn away. Outside, the forest said nothing, but in the hush of that lonely cabin, something had already started to listen. Part 2. The Whisper of Trust. By late afternoon, the sky had turned the color of steel. The forest pressed close around the cabin, dark and endless, each cedar standing like a sentinel in the mist. James Paul stepped outside, an apple in one hand and a small loaf of bread in the other. He walked toward the old cedar stump near the tree line, a place where the grass met the shadows. He set the apples down, carefully placed the bread beside them, and then stood still for a long moment. The wind stirred softly, brushing through his coat. He didn't know what made him do it. Maybe curiosity, maybe something older, an instinct buried beneath years of silence. Whatever it was, it felt right. He turned and walked back toward the cabin without looking behind him. Rex padded beside him, ears twitching at the faint rustle of leaves. The old dog glanced back once, gave a quiet whine, and followed his master inside. That night the fire burned low. James sat by the window, staring out into the darkness. The forest was black, thick with fog, the kind that swallows distance and time. He couldn't see the stump from where he sat, but his mind kept drifting there. He tried to tell himself it was nothing, maybe a bear, maybe just habit, but deep down he knew the forest had changed since that night. It felt awake. When dawn came, the light was thin and cold. The air carried the scent of wet soil and cedar sap. James stepped outside and walked toward the stump boots crunching over the frost. The apples were gone. In their place lay two small branches crossed neatly over one another. He crouched down, staring at them. It wasn't random. The sticks were clean, freshly broken, placed with deliberate care. A mark. A sign. He felt his pulse quicken, a tremor running through his hands. No storm did that, he whispered. Rex sniffed at the ground, then whined, tail low. James looked toward the forest. The trees stood silent, watching. That night he repeated the gesture. He left 3 apples, a handful of bread, and a small tin cup of water on the stump. Then, as before, he turned and walked back without a word. The next morning they were gone again. In their place, a small pattern of stones perfectly aligned in a circle. The trades continued for days. Apples became pine cones. Bread became feathers. Each exchange felt like a heartbeat, slow but steady. James never saw who took the food. He didn't need to. He could feel it, the sense of something just beyond the tree line, not menacing, not wild, simply there. At first he thought it might be a test, a way to measure trust. By the 7th day, he found himself speaking softly into the woods as he placed his offerings. "For you," he said once, feeling foolish as the words left his lips. "If you're still out there, thank you." The forest answered only with wind. But that night everything changed. The moon was thin, a pale slit of light cutting through the clouds. The fire inside the cabin hissed and popped. Rex stirred in his sleep, ears twitching. James sat by the window again, a habit he couldn't break. Then from somewhere deep within the trees came a sound. A low rumble. Rough. Uneven. Alive. It wasn't an animal growl, it was deeper layered, like stones grinding under pressure. It rose, fell, then steadied. James froze, his breath catching. Another sound followed. A word. Food. The voice was guttural, strained, like someone forcing human syllables through a throat not made for them. "Safe." James's fingers tightened on the armrest. Rex stood, hackles raised, but didn't bark. Then came the 3rd word. Friend. Silence fell heavy and complete. James's heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his fingertips. He whispered to himself, voice shaking. It spoke. He stood slowly, the old floorboards creaking beneath his boots. He took a single step toward the door, but stopped halfway. The voice hadn't been close, but it had been clear. Too clear to mistake. His thoughts raced. Could it mimic human speech? Was it repeating what it had heard, or had it understood? Rex whined again, low and uncertain. James crouched beside him, resting a hand on the dog's neck. "It's all right," he murmured, though he wasn't sure he believed it. He sat back down and stared into the dark woods. His mind replayed the sound over and over, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. Food. Safe. Friend. It wasn't just words, it was meaning. Something was trying to speak. And somehow, impossibly, it had chosen him. James leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on the forest beyond the glass. The flame in the lantern flickered. "It understands," he whispered. He felt the truth of it settle deep in his chest. A shiver ran through him, not of fear, but of awe. For years he had lived surrounded by silence. Now that silence had spoken back. Outside, the fog thickened. The trees swayed gently, their shadows bending like silent listeners. Somewhere in the distance, wood knocked softly once, twice, a slow reply. James smiled faintly, the first real smile in a long time. Whatever waited out there wasn't just a legend anymore. It was real, and it was listening. Part 3. The Words of the Forest. The moon hung high that night, a pale coin drifting through the drifting mist. The air was cold enough to sting, yet James Paul sat outside, his hands cupped around a small lantern flame. The fire's glow flickered across the porch and spilled over the clearing beyond, where the forest waited, ancient, quiet, watching. He had left no apples that day, no bread, no sign of offering. Somehow, he didn't need to. The connection was already there, unspoken but unbroken. Rex lay near his feet, one eye open, tail occasionally twitching. Every few moments the dog lifted his head to listen to something James couldn't yet hear. Then from the shadows between the cedars came a shape, massive, upright, moving with slow, deliberate purpose. The creature stepped into the half-light. It was larger than he remembered, 8 feet, maybe more, its fur a deep mix of earth and silver, like the forest itself had woven it. The moon caught the edges of its face, revealing a scar that ran across its brow. It stopped just beyond the fire's reach. Neither moved. The crackle of the flame became the only sound in the world. James swallowed hard, his voice low, uncertain. "You again." The creature's head tilted slightly as if listening to something deeper than words. Then, after a long pause, its chest expanded with a breath so deep it seemed to pull the air from the clearing. The voice that came was heavy and rough, each word torn from a throat not made for speech. "Men." It paused, the sound vibrating through the air like distant thunder. "Two kinds." James blinked. The words were clearer this time, measured, meaningful. The creature lifted one hand, pointing toward the forest, then toward the horizon, where the faint hum of far-off machinery sometimes echoed from the valley. "Destroyers. Protectors." The words fell like stones into the silence. James felt his chest tighten. He knew what it meant: the loggers, the hunters, the endless noise of saws cutting through what was once sacred. He set the lantern down slowly, eyes never leaving the creature. "You know men." The creature's eyes glinted dark and golden all at once. "Most men bring death." It turned its gaze toward the tree's voice, dropping lower, almost mournful. "Few give safe." For a moment, James forgot to breathe. This wasn't mimicry. This wasn't random. The creature understood. It had seen humanity for what it was, the best and the worst. He sat forward, elbows on his knees, heart pounding but calm. "You're saying," he began, then hesitated, "some bad, some good." The Bigfoot regarded him for a long while, then gave the smallest, slowest nod. That single gesture, simple, deliberate, hit James harder than any word could. It wasn't just speech. It was judgment, recognition. The forest itself was speaking through this being, and what it said was not kind, but it was true. He felt something deep inside him shift, something that had been locked away since Anna's death. He had blamed the storm, the world, even God. But now he saw it differently. Destruction wasn't nature's cruelty. It was man's carelessness. The Bigfoot turned its head slightly, looking up toward the stars. Its voice softened, almost gentle now. "Forest. Home." James nodded, eyes stinging from more than the smoke. "Yes," he whispered. "Home." For a while neither spoke. The fire crackled. The moonlight drifted through the clearing like slow water. Then the creature said something that sent a shiver down James's spine. "Most men forget." It gestured toward the earth with one massive hand, the motion fluid, mournful. "They take, cut, burn. No, give back." The words were halting, but the meaning was crystal clear. It wasn't anger he heard, it was sorrow, the kind that came from witnessing too much loss. James thought of the logging trucks he'd seen rumbling down the valley, their beds loaded with centuries of life turned to lumber. He thought of empty hillsides where the wind howled through stumps instead of branches. He whispered almost to himself, "We do that." The creature looked at him again, eyes deep, knowing. Then it said softer than before, "But you give safe." James's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to deny, to say he was no better than the rest. But the creature's tone stopped him. There was no flattery in it, just truth. Somewhere deep inside he felt something long dormant stir again, a warmth, fragile but alive. Maybe that was what redemption sounded like. The fire crackled louder as if answering them both. Finally, the creature took a slow step backward into the mist. The moonlight caught its eyes one last time before the shadows reclaimed it. James stood, his voice trembling as he said, "Wait, what are you?" The Bigfoot paused at the edge of the trees, the forest whispering around it. Then, in a tone almost human, almost sacred, it rumbled, "Forest." And then it was gone. James stood alone in the moonlight, the words echoing through his mind. Forest. Men. Destroyers. Protectors. He sank slowly back into his chair, the night heavy around him. He realized then what the creature truly was: not a monster, not a myth, but a mirror. And for the first time in his life, he was terrified not of what lived in the woods, but of what lived inside men. Part 4. The warning. The rain came hard that night, sheets of silver slashing through the pines, the sound of thunder rumbling far beyond the ridges. The forest seemed to breathe in pain, each gust of wind a cry against what was coming. Inside the small cabin, James Paul sat by the fading fire, its glow trembling weakly against the storm. Rex lay near the door, restless head lifting at every sound beyond the walls. The night felt heavier than usual, like the weight of something unseen pressing in from the woods. James rubbed his palms together, staring into the embers. He had grown used to silence, to solitude. But lately the quiet no longer felt empty. It felt watchful. Then it came. 3 low knocks, heavy, deliberate, echoed through the storm. He froze, breath shallow. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was him. James stood, heart hammering, and opened the door. Rain lashed his face, soaking his shirt in seconds. Lightning split the sky, and in that flash of white, he saw it standing at the edge of the clearing, motionless, soaked but unbowed. The Bigfoot. Its fur was matted, darkened by rain, but its eyes, those deep amber eyes, burned with urgency. It stepped forward, slow but steady. Each footfall made the mud shudder. When it reached the porch, James could see the tension in its body, the way its chest heaved as if fighting something greater than fear. The voice came raw and strained, forcing words through the sound of the rain. More. Come. James blinked. What? The creature raised a massive hand, gesturing toward the mountains beyond the forest line. Men, many men. Danger. The words were broken, yet clear enough to send a chill through him. James's throat went dry. He thought of the hunters he'd heard about down in the valley, stories of men with rifles and traps chasing legends for trophies. He thought of the loggers who didn't care what they tore down, only what they could sell. He took a step closer. Hunters. The creature gave a short, guttural sound of confirmation, then softer. You safe. Others. Not. For a moment, neither spoke. The firelight flickered through the open doorway, painting their faces in orange and shadow. Then came another phrase, one that froze James where he stood. Bond. Danger. The Bigfoot's tone changed, heavier, almost sorrowful. It pressed a hand to its chest, then gestured between them. James understood. Their connection, whatever fragile trust they had built, was forbidden. Dangerous. Not only for him, but for the creature itself. He looked into those eyes and saw something beyond fear, regret. Rain pounded the roof. Wind howled through the trees. But inside that moment there was only stillness. James swallowed, voice hoarse. You're saying they'll come for me? For you? The Bigfoot nodded slowly. Then its voice dropped to a low rumble that trembled through the air. Careful, James. Soon. Choose. The words lingered like a final breath. James took a step forward, his boots sinking into the wet earth. Choose. He echoed, almost shouting over the rain. Between what the creature didn't answer, instead it looked toward the ridge again, toward the distant lights of men, then back to him. Its hand clenched briefly as if holding something unseen. James's chest tightened. He wanted to ask more, to understand, but he already knew. This wasn't just a warning about danger. It was a farewell. The creature turned slightly as though ready to disappear into the storm, but James called out, his voice breaking through the thunder. Wait. The Bigfoot stopped. Rain ran down James's face, stinging his eyes. You said I have to choose, he said softly. I already did. The creature's head tilted, listening. I chose to trust you. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then in the dim light, James saw the smallest flicker of expression, a tightening of the creature's jaw, a blink slower than breath. It raised its head toward the sky, and when it looked back at him, its gaze carried something almost human. Good man. It rumbled. The voice trembled as if weighed by emotion. Good heart. The words nearly broke him. Thunder cracked overhead. A gust of wind tore through the clearing, scattering leaves and rain like shards of glass. The Bigfoot turned away, shoulders bowed, and stepped into the storm. Lightning flashed once more, and for an instant its silhouette filled the night, tall, solemn, and impossibly lonely. Then it vanished into the trees. James stood there long after it was gone, rain pouring down his face, soaking him to the bone. Behind him the fire sputtered and died, leaving only the sound of the storm and the echo of those last words. "Careful, James. Soon choose." He whispered into the darkness, voice trembling but resolute. "I already did." And though the forest gave no reply, he felt it somewhere deep beneath the roots and rain, the faintest whisper of understanding. Part 5, The Last Words. The fog came thick and white that morning, rolling through the valley like breath from something ancient. The world was still too still. No birds, no wind, no sound but the slow crackle of the dying fire inside James's cabin. He stood by the doorway, coffee in hand, staring into the mist. Rex, the old dog, slept near his boot's tail, twitching softly in dreams. James hadn't slept. The night had been long, heavy with memories and the echo of a voice that refused to fade. "Careful, James. Soon choose." Those words had followed him through the storm and into the quiet dawn. The choice, he realized, had already been made. He'd chosen trust over fear. And in a world filled with noise and ruin that felt like a kind of salvation. He was about to turn back inside when something shifted in the fog. At first it was only a shadow, a ripple in the white. Then it grew, taking shape, moving closer. James's breath caught. The fog parted like curtains, and there it was. The Bigfoot. It stepped forward slowly, its massive frame half shrouded by mist, as though it were both there and not. Each step was deliberate, soundless, reverent. It stopped at the edge of the porch, close enough that James could see the droplets of dew clinging to its fur. The morning light glinted faintly off the silver streaks that ran through its coat, and for the first time it looked peaceful. Neither spoke. For a long moment they simply stood, two beings from different worlds, bound by something that didn't need words. Rex stirred, but didn't bark. The dog lifted its head, looked at the giant figure, then lowered it again as if it too understood. The Bigfoot's chest rose with a deep, steady breath. Then it spoke, the voice low and rough, but softer than James had ever heard. "James." The sound of his name in that voice froze him in place. It wasn't mimicry, it was meaning. Another breath, another word. "Friend." The syllable broke gently through the fog like sunlight through clouds. James's throat tightened. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. The creature's gaze didn't waver. Its eyes, dark and golden, held no fear, no pain, only recognition. Then came the next words, each one slow-shaped with effort, as if carved into the air itself. "Forest safe. Trust." The last word lingered, drawn out almost like a plea or a prayer. Trust. It wasn't just a message. It was a legacy. James blinked hard. A single tear rolled down his cheek, cutting through the years of dust and silence that had built on his face. He didn't wipe it away. He let it fall. He wanted to say something, to thank it, to promise, but no words came. Everything he could say felt too small for that moment. The Bigfoot stood motionless, the fog curling gently around its legs like smoke. Then slowly it bowed its head just once before turning toward the forest. James reached out instinctively, but stopped himself. Some goodbyes were meant to remain unbroken. The creature took one step, then another, vanishing little by little into the pale morning. Its shape dissolved among the trees until there was nothing left but mist and memory. For a long time, James stood there staring into the place where it had disappeared. The forest beyond seemed somehow different, lighter, breathing again. He exhaled shakily. The air tasted clean, new. Behind him the fire crackled faintly, and Rex sighed in his sleep. The world felt gentle. James sat down on the porch steps, elbows resting on his knees, eyes still wet but soft now. He whispered into the silence, "You were never the monster." A breeze moved through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and rain. For a fleeting moment, James thought he heard something carried with it 3 soft knocks far off in the woods. He smiled through the tears. "Goodbye, my friend." The fog lifted slowly, revealing the outlines of the forest, the home of the creature that had taught him more about humanity than most men ever could. James looked toward the horizon where the light began to rise. "Forest safe," he murmured. "I'll keep it that way." Then he stood shoulders straight, heart strangely full. The loneliness that had followed him for a decade felt lighter, replaced by something warmer, something like grace. As he stepped back inside, he paused once more at the door, hand resting on the frame. The forest behind him whispered quietly a language he could not speak, but somehow understood. And in that stillness he knew this truth. Kindness, no matter how small, was the only voice that ever truly echoed. Years passed. Seasons turned. The cabin aged with the wind its roof bowed, but standing still like the man who had built it. James Paul now sat on the porch, his hands trembling slightly as he poured warm water into an old tin bucket. Rex, older and slower, rested beside his boots, the dog's fur silvered just like his own hair. On the step before him lay a folded wool blanket, a bucket of fresh water, and a small oil lamp flickering softly against the dusk. He looked toward the forest where the pines whispered under the fading sun, and spoke with the gentle calm of a man who had long made peace. Every fall before the first frost, he murmured, "I leave a light for a friend." Somewhere deep in the trees, a single knock echoed low, distant, familiar. James smiled, eyes glistening in the lamplight. "Welcome home," the forest breathed again. In the Wild West, kindness is the only fire that never dies. Bigfoot was never the monster, only the mirror of our humanity. If this story touched your heart, leave a fire emoji in the comments. This is Rancher Wild West Stories, where legends heal and silence speaks.